The morning light filtered through the massive glass dome of the Centauri Grand Museum, casting rainbow patterns across the polished marble floors. Visitors walked slowly through the halls, their voices echoing softly as they moved from one display to another. Children pressed their faces against glass cases, their breath fogging the surfaces as they stared at strange objects from distant worlds. In the furthest corner of the alien wing, past the crowded displays of exotic artifacts and mineral collections, stood a single glass case that most people barely noticed. The small metal sign beside it read simple words that made visitors walk by without stopping. Worker from distant planet found 40 years ago. Basic intelligence level. Inside the clear container, a figure sat perfectly still. Her skin seemed to glow softly like moonlight on water, changing colors with each breath she took. Her hair moved like liquid silver, even though there was no wind in the sealed space. Her eyes, which shifted from blue to green to purple, watched everyone who passed by. Her name was Kira, though no one at the museum knew this. No one had asked. Her name in 40 years. She remembered everything. The day her world ended. The day the human ships came from the sky like angry metal birds. The day they took her from her family's crystal home and put her in this box. She was young then, barely an adult by her people's standards. Now she had grown older in this tiny space, watching the same white walls, breathing the same recycled air. Every day was exactly the same. The lights would turn on automatically at 8 in the morning. The first visitors would arrive an hour later. Most would walk past her case without stopping. Some would pause, read the sign, and move on. Children would sometimes stare longer, but their parents would pull them away to see more interesting things. "Look at that one, Mommy," a little girl said, pointing at Kira's case. She looked sad. "Don't be silly, honey," her mother replied, tugging her daughter's hand. "It's just a display. Come see the space rocks over here." Kira wanted to tell the little girl that she was right. She was sad. She had been sad for so many years that sadness felt like an old friend now. But the machine that kept her alive also kept her silent. She could move her eyes, blink, and breathe, but that was about all. The worst part wasn't the loneliness, though that was terrible. The worst part was knowing that everyone thought she was stupid. The sign said she had basic intelligence, like a clever pet or a simple machine. But Kira could understand every word the humans spoke. She had learned their language by listening to thousands of conversations over the years. She knew about their wars, their families, their hopes and dreams. She knew that the woman who cleaned the museum floors was saving money to visit her grandchildren. She knew that the security guard who worked nights was writing a book about his experiences in the war. She knew that the scientist who studied her case every few weeks was starting to doubt what the old records said about her people. Dr. Rachel Winters came by every Tuesday morning at exactly 10:30. She would stand in front of Kira's case with her tablet computer, taking notes and measurements. Unlike the other visitors, Dr. Winters would look directly into Kira's eyes. Sometimes Kira thought the scientist was beginning to see something there that the others missed. "The neural activity readings are interesting," Dr. Winters would mutter to herself, typing notes. Much higher than expected for a basic-level intelligence. If only she knew, Kira thought. If only any of them knew that she was not a worker from some primitive planet. She had been a peace speaker for her people, someone who traveled between the crystal cities to help solve problems and prevent conflicts. She had been trying to save lives when the humans arrived, trying to arrange a peaceful surrender that would protect the children and elderly. But the human soldiers hadn't cared about peace talks. They had seen her glowing skin and strange appearance and decided she would make an interesting trophy for their museum. The machine that kept her alive was starting to make different sounds lately. Small clicking noises that hadn't been there before. Sometimes the lights inside her case would flicker for just a moment. Kira had been trapped long enough to understand what this meant. The system was getting old and tired, just like she was. She wondered what would happen when it finally broke down completely. Would someone fix it? Would they even notice if she died? Or would they just update her sign to say, "Deceased specimen," and leave her there as a curiosity? The afternoon brought school groups, as it always did on Wednesdays. Dozens of children in matching blue uniforms would flood through the museum, their teachers trying to keep them organized and quiet. Most of the kids were more interested in the gift shop than the displays, but a few would always find their way to Kira's corner. "Teacher, what's wrong with that lady?" a boy asked, pointing at Kira. "She looks like she's crying." "That's not a lady, Tommy," his teacher said without really looking. "It's just an old museum piece from the war. Come along now, we need to see the dinosaur bones before lunch." But Tommy stayed behind for a moment, studying Kira's face with the serious attention that only children could manage. He pressed his small hand against the glass, and for just an instant, Kira felt something she hadn't experienced in decades, a moment of real connection with another living being. "I see you," the boy whispered, so quietly that only Kira could hear him. Then, his teacher called him away, and Kira was alone again with her glowing case and her silent thoughts. The evening hours were the hardest. When the museum closed and the lights dimmed, Kira had nothing to do but remember. She would think about her home world, with its singing crystal formations and warm purple sunsets. She would remember her family, her parents, her younger brother, her grandmother who had taught her the old songs of their people. Sometimes she would try to sing those songs in her mind, just to keep the memories alive. But as the years passed, she found it harder and harder to remember the exact melodies. The words were fading too, replaced by the constant sound of human voices and human machines. Late at night, when even the security guards were busy in other parts of the building, Kira would sometimes see maintenance workers moving through the shadows. They would check the systems that kept the museum running, making sure everything was working properly for another day of visitors. One of these workers had started spending more time near her case lately. He was a quiet man with tired eyes who seemed to actually read the information signs instead of just walking past them. Unlike the others, he would sometimes stop and look at her directly, not just glancing at the case, but really studying her face. There was something different about the way he looked at her. Not like she was a thing on display, but like she was, a person who happened to be trapped in a box. It was such a small thing, but after 40 years of being treated like furniture, even that tiny bit of recognition felt like a gift. Kira began to notice that this maintenance worker would time his visits for when she seemed most alert. He would linger by her case while supposedly checking the environmental controls, but she could tell he was really watching her. And slowly, carefully, she began to watch him back. Maybe, after all these years of being forgotten, someone was finally starting to see her as more than just another display in the Museum of Conquered Worlds. Jake Rodriguez had been fixing things his whole life. As a kid, he took apart radios just to see how they worked. In the military, he kept the big machines running when everyone else gave up. Now, at 34, he spent his nights making sure the museum's life support systems didn't break down. It wasn't glamorous work, but Jake preferred the quiet hours when the building was empty. No crowds, no tour guides explaining things incorrectly, no children running around screaming. Just him, his tools, and the gentle hum of machines keeping everything running smoothly. The alien wing was his least favorite area to work in, not because of the strange objects on display, but because of what they represented. Jake had served in the final years of the war, and he'd seen things that still kept him awake some nights. The official story was that humanity had brought peace to primitive worlds, but Jake remembered the burning cities and the desperate faces of people just trying to protect their families. He tried not to think about it too much. The war was over. These artifacts were just objects now, pieces of history that helped people learn about other worlds. That's what he told himself anyway. But there was one display that bothered him more than the others. In the back corner of The alien wing stood a glass case containing what the sign called a basic intelligence worker. Jake had read the description dozens of times during his maintenance rounds. It claimed the being inside had been found during routine exploration and brought to the museum for educational purposes. The first time Jake really looked at the figure in the case, something felt wrong. The being inside wasn't positioned like a preserved specimen. She was sitting upright, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Her skin glowed softly in the artificial light, and her silver hair seemed to move even though there was no air current in the sealed container. Most disturbing of all were her eyes. They followed movement. They blinked. They showed expressions that Jake recognized as very human emotions: sadness, loneliness, and something that looked almost like hope whenever someone stopped to look at her. "That's impossible," Jake muttered to himself during his first week on the job. "The sign says it's just a preserved specimen." But as the weeks turned into months, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched whenever he worked near that corner of the museum. He started paying closer attention to the environmental controls for that particular case. The readings were all wrong for a preservation system. Instead, they matched the settings for a life support unit designed to keep someone alive. Jake was good with computers, a skill that had served him well in the military and now helped him maintain the museum's complex systems. During his lunch breaks, he started digging through the museum's digital archives, looking for more information about the being in the corner case. What he found made his stomach turn. The acquisition records from 40 years ago told a very different story than the public display. The being had been captured during what the documents called a pacification mission on a planet called Lumina Prime. She hadn't been found during peaceful exploration. She'd been taken prisoner during a military operation. The medical reports were even more disturbing. They described advanced neural structures, complex language capabilities, and evidence of telepathic abilities. The being in the case wasn't a simple worker with basic intelligence. She was clearly as smart as any human, possibly smarter. Jake felt sick reading the reports. This wasn't a museum display. It was a prison. That night, Jake found himself standing in front of the case for a long time after finishing his maintenance work. The being inside looked back at him, and for the first time in months, Jake really looked at her face. He saw intelligence there, and awareness, and a deep sadness that reminded him of prisoners of war he'd encountered during his military service. "Can you understand me?" he asked quietly, feeling foolish for talking to what everyone claimed was just a preserved specimen. The being's eyes widened slightly, and the soft glow of her skin seemed to pulse faster. It might have been coincidence, but Jake didn't think so. The next night, Jake brought his dinner to the alien wing instead of eating in the break room. He sat on a bench near the corner case and ate his sandwich while talking quietly about his day. The being watched him the entire time, and Jake could swear she was listening to every word. "My name's Jake," he said between bites. "I know you probably can't answer, but you seem like you're paying attention. The system keeping you alive is getting old. I can hear it struggling sometimes. Management doesn't want to spend money on upgrades for displays that don't bring in many visitors." The being's expression changed when he mentioned the failing systems. She looked scared, and Jake realized she probably understood exactly what that meant for her survival. Over the following weeks, Jake developed a routine. He would finish his regular maintenance work, then spend the last hour of his shift sitting near the corner case, eating his dinner and talking about whatever came to mind. He told her about his day, his work, his small apartment across town. He even found himself sharing memories from the war that he'd never told anyone else. "I was just following orders," he said one night, staring at his hands. "That's what we all told ourselves. But I saw the cities we destroyed, the families we separated. I told myself it was necessary, that we were bringing civilization to primitive worlds. But looking at you now, I don't think any of those worlds were as primitive as we claimed." The being's skin pulsed with gentle colors that seemed to respond to the emotion in his voice. Jake was becoming more convinced each day that she not only understood his words but felt something about what he was sharing. Dr. Winters had been asking more questions about the corner display lately. She'd requested additional tests and seemed puzzled by the readings she was getting. Jake worried that too much attention might lead to the being transferred to a research facility, which would probably be even worse than the museum. 3 months. Into his routine of dinner conversations, something changed. Jake was talking about his plans for the weekend when he felt something touch his thoughts. It was gentle, like someone tapping him on the shoulder inside his mind. For just a moment, he experienced a flash of images and emotions that weren't his own. He saw a beautiful world of crystal cities and purple skies. He felt the warmth of a family's love and the weight of responsibility that came with being chosen to speak for your people. He experienced the terror of capture and the crushing loneliness of 40 years in isolation. Jake jumped up from the bench, nearly dropping his sandwich. The being in the case was looking at him with an expression of surprise and hope that was unmistakably real. "You're telepathic," Jake whispered. "You've been trying to communicate this whole time." The being nodded slightly, and Jake felt another gentle touch in his mind. This time, it carried a single concept that needed no words to understand: gratitude. She was grateful that someone finally saw her as a person instead of a thing. Jake looked around the empty museum, his mind racing. Everything he'd suspected was true. The being in the case was a prisoner, not a specimen. She was intelligent, aware, and probably one of the last survivors of whatever had happened to her world. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Jake couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kira's face and felt the echo of her telepathic touch in his mind. The images she had shared were so vivid, so real, that he could still smell the crystal flowers of her destroyed world and feel the warmth of the purple sun on his skin. He spent the weekend in his small apartment, pacing back and forth while trying to figure out what to do. Calling the authorities was pointless. They were the ones who had put Kira in that case in the first place. The museum director would never listen to a maintenance worker claiming that one of their displays was actually a living prisoner. But Jake couldn't just walk away and pretend he hadn't seen the truth. Monday night couldn't come fast enough. Jake arrived at the museum early, rushing through his regular maintenance duties so he could spend more time with Kira. When he finally sat down on the bench near her case, she was already watching for him, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I've been thinking about what you showed me," Jake said quietly. "About your world, your family. I'm so sorry for what happened to them, for what my people did." Kira's skin pulsed with soft blue light, and Jake felt another gentle touch in his mind. This time, the telepathic contact was clearer, stronger. Instead of just images, he could sense actual thoughts and feelings. She wasn't angry with him, he realized. Despite everything humans had done to her and her people, despite 40 years of imprisonment, Kira held no hatred in her heart. She understood that Jake was different from the soldiers who had destroyed her world. Over the next few weeks, their telepathic conversations grew longer and deeper. Kira shared memories of her life before the war, growing up in a crystal city that sang in the wind, learning the art of peaceful communication from the elders of her people, traveling between settlements to help resolve conflicts without violence. She had been young when the human ships arrived, barely past the age when her people were considered adults. But she had already shown great promise as a peacekeeper, someone who could calm angry minds and help enemies find common ground. "You were trying to save lives when they captured you, weren't you?" Jake asked one night. The answer came not in words, but in a flood of memories. Jake saw Kira standing in a great crystal hall surrounded by the leaders of her people. The human ships were visible through the transparent walls, dark shapes against the purple sky. Everyone was scared, but they were looking to Kira for guidance. She had volunteered to meet with the human commanders to offer surrender in exchange for the safety of the children and elderly. She had walked out of the Crystal City alone, carrying a white banner that meant peace in both human and her people's languages. But the human soldiers hadn't cared about peace talks. They had seen her strange beauty, her glowing skin and telepathic abilities, and decided she would make a valuable prize for the museums back on Earth. They had stunned her with energy weapons and carried her away while her city burned behind them. Jake felt tears on his cheeks as the memory faded. They never even gave you a chance to negotiate. Kira's response was tinged with sadness, but also with something else, a gentle forgiveness that Jake didn't understand. How could she not hate them? How could she not hate him? The answer came in more memories, but these were different. These were from her years in the museum, watching humans day after day. She had seen children laugh with pure joy at simple things. She had observed elderly couples holding hands as they walked through the displays, still in love after decades. Together. She had watched security guards share their lunch with stray cats behind the building. Kira had learned that humans were capable of both great cruelty and great kindness. The soldiers who destroyed her world were not the same as the little boy who had whispered, "I see you," through her glass case. Jake was not the same as the officers who had ordered her capture. "You still have hope for us," Jake said, understanding, flooding through him. "After everything we've done to you, you still believe we can be better." Her telepathic response was warm and certain. She had seen the best of humanity during her imprisonment, even in the darkest moments. She believed that people like Jake proved her species could learn, could grow, could choose compassion over conquest. But hope wasn't enough to free her from the case. Jake spent his days researching the museum's security systems and her life support equipment. The case wasn't just a display. It was a sophisticated prison designed to keep Kira alive but powerless. Breaking her out would require careful planning and perfect timing. The life support system was definitely failing. Jake could see it in the diagnostic readings he pulled up each night. The machine was 40 years old and hadn't been properly maintained in decades. Museum management considered it a low priority since the display didn't attract many visitors. Jake estimated they had maybe 2 months before the system failed completely. After that, Kira would slowly suffocate in her glass prison, and no one would probably notice until it was too late. He started making preparations quietly. During his lunch breaks, he studied the museum's layout and security protocols. He identified the blind spots in the camera system and figured out when the guards took their breaks. He researched what Kira's people needed to survive and began gathering materials to build a portable life support system. The hardest part was keeping his emotions hidden during his regular work shifts. Dr. Winters had been asking more questions about the alien displays, and Security Chief Reynolds seemed to be paying more attention to staff behavior. Jake forced himself to act normal around his co-workers, even when all he wanted to do was run to Kira's case and tell her everything would be okay. "Jake, you've been spending a lot of time in the alien wing lately," his supervisor mentioned one day. "Everything running smoothly down there?" "Just some minor issues with the environmental controls," Jake lied smoothly. "Nothing major, but I want to keep an eye on them." His supervisor nodded and moved on to other topics, but Jake noticed that Security Chief Reynolds was standing nearby, listening to the conversation with unusual interest. That night, Jake's telepathic conversation with Kira took on a new urgency. He shared his escape plan with her, showing her the route they would take and the preparations he was making. But he also shared his fears. What if he was caught? What if something went wrong? What if he made things worse for her? Kira's response surprised him. She wasn't afraid of the risk. She was afraid of hope. After 40 years of disappointment, the possibility of freedom was almost too painful to consider. What if Jake changed his mind? What if the plan failed? What if she spent her last days dreaming of escape only to die in the same glass case where she'd spent most of her life? Jake reached out and pressed his palm against the glass of her case. Even through the barrier, he could feel the warmth of her telepathic presence. "I won't abandon you," he promised. "Whatever happens, I won't let you face this alone anymore." For the first time in 40 years, Kira allowed herself to truly believe that rescue might be possible. But as the days passed and Jake's preparations continued, both of them knew they were running out of time. The failing life support system was getting worse, and Security Chief Reynolds was definitely watching Jake more closely. The window for escape was closing fast. The night Jake had been planning for finally arrived. He had chosen Tuesday because that was when the museum's main power grid received its weekly maintenance check. For exactly 30 minutes, the backup generators would be running the building while the primary systems were tested. It was the only time when multiple alarms and system alerts would be considered normal. Jake's hands shook as he gathered his tools and the portable life support device he had built from spare parts. 3 weeks of careful construction had gone into the small machine that he hoped would keep Kira alive long enough to get her somewhere safe. He had tested it dozens of times, but there was no way to know if it would actually work for someone of her species. At 11:47 p.m., Jake made his way to the alien wing. The museum felt different at night, full of shadows and strange sounds that seemed louder in the darkness. His footsteps echoed on the marble floors as he walked past displays of artifacts from dozens of conquered worlds. Kira was waiting for him, her skin glowing brighter than usual with nervous energy. Through their telepathic connection, Jake could feel her mixture of hope and terror. She had dreamed of this moment for 40 years, but now that it was actually happening, the reality was almost overwhelming. "Are you ready?" Jake whispered, setting down his equipment beside her case. Her response came not in thoughts, but in a wave of pure determination. Whatever happened next, she was ready to face it rather than spend another day in captivity. Jake connected his diagnostic computer to the case's control system and began the delicate process of overriding the safety locks. The machine had been designed to prevent exactly what he was trying to do, but 40 years of maintenance work had taught him how to speak the key. Language of old computers. The first alarm went off at 11:52, right on schedule. Jake had triggered a minor malfunction in the environmental system 3 halls away, just enough to draw the night security guard's attention. He had maybe 8 minutes before the guard finished investigating and resumed his normal patrol route. Kira's case began to hum as Jake's override codes took effect. The stasis field that had kept her trapped was slowly powering down, but the process couldn't be rushed. Moving too fast might overload her nervous system after decades of artificial suppression. "How are you feeling?" Jake asked, watching the readings on his computer screen. The telepathic response was complex, relief mixed with pain as sensation returned to parts of her body that had been numb for 40 years. Her fingers twitched for the first time in decades, and tears began streaming down her face. At 11:56, the case's locks finally disengaged. Jake pulled open the front panel and reached inside to help Kira stand. She was lighter than he had expected, her bones delicate like a bird's. Her legs couldn't support her weight at first, so Jake had to catch her as she stumbled forward. "Take your time," he said, supporting her with one arm while he activated the portable life support system with the other. "We've got a few more minutes." But they didn't. Security Chief Reynolds' voice crackled over the museum's intercom system. "All units, we have an unauthorized access alert in the alien wing. Converging on Sector 7 immediately." Jake's heart sank. Someone must have noticed the unusual activity on the computer systems. Their window of opportunity was closing fast. "Can you walk?" he asked Kira urgently. She nodded, though Jake could feel through their connection that every step was agony. Her muscles had atrophied during her long imprisonment, and her nervous system was still adjusting to freedom. But her determination was stronger than her physical weakness. They made it halfway down the corridor before the lights came on. Security guards were shouting orders to each other from somewhere behind them, their footsteps echoing through the halls as they searched for the source of the disturbance. Jake pulled Kira into a maintenance alcove and pressed his security card against the access panel. The door opened to reveal a narrow staircase that led down to the museum's mechanical levels. Few people knew about this route except the maintenance staff. "Stay close to me," Jake whispered, helping Kira down the steep stairs. The portable life support system was working, but he could see she was struggling to breathe the unfiltered air. They emerged in the basement mechanical room, surrounded by the humming machinery that kept the museum running. Jake had hidden supplies here earlier. A change of clothes for Kira, some basic medical supplies, and enough money to get them both out of the city. "We need to keep moving," Jake said, helping Kira into the simple dress and jacket he had brought. "My truck is parked 2 blocks away, but we have to get there without being seen." Kira nodded, and Jake felt her reaching out telepathically to sense the emotions of the people searching for them. Her abilities were returning as she got further from the suppression field, and she could feel the confusion and alarm of the security guards above them. They slipped out through the museum's loading dock into the cool night air. For Kira, it was the first time she had breathed real outside air in 40 years. She stopped walking for a moment, overwhelmed by the sensation of wind on her face and the smell of rain approaching. "It's beautiful," she said aloud. The first words Jake had ever heard her speak. Her voice was soft and musical, with an accent unlike anything he had ever heard. "We can't stop yet," Jake said gently, though he understood her amazement. "We need to get to the truck." They made their way through the empty streets, staying in the shadows cast by streetlights. Jake's truck was parked exactly where he had left it, under a broken streetlight that provided extra darkness. He helped Kira into the passenger seat and started the engine. As they drove away from the museum, Jake could see police cars arriving with flashing lights. Dr. Winters was standing in the parking lot, arguing with Security Chief Reynolds about something, but they were too far away to be recognized, just another truck driving through the night. "Where are we going?" Kira asked, her voice growing stronger as her body continued to recover. Jake looked at her in the dim light from the dashboard. She was still weak, still adjusting to freedom, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there in the museum. Hope, real, unguarded hope for the future. "Away from here," Jake said. "Somewhere they'll never think to look for us. Somewhere you can heal and decide what you want to do with the rest of your life." Kira reached out and touched his hand on the steering wheel. Through their telepathic connection, he felt her gratitude, not just for the rescue, but for seeing her as a person worth saving. After 40 years of being treated like an object, that recognition meant more than freedom itself. Behind them, the lights of the city grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. For the first time in decades, Kira's future was her own to choose. 6 months later, Jake was fixing a water recycling unit on a small frontier colony called Haven's Rest when he heard Kira laughing in the next room. The sound still surprised him sometimes, not because it was unusual, but because for so many years he had only known her as the sad figure trapped behind glass. They had driven for 3 days after the escape, sleeping in the truck and eating at small roadside diners where nobody asked questions. Jake had used his savings to buy passage on a freight transport heading to the outer colonies, places where the government's reach was limited and people minded their own business. Haven's Rest was perfect for them. It was a mining colony on the edge of human space, populated by people who had come there to start over or escape their past. The colony administrator, a tough woman named Captain Torres, had taken one look at Jake's maintenance skills and Kira's obvious intelligence and offered them both work without asking too many questions about their background. "Jake, come see this," Kira called from the small greenhouse she had built behind their prefab housing unit. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and walked outside to find Kira kneeling beside a row of strange, crystalline plants that seemed to glow with their own inner light. She had grown them from seeds she had somehow hidden in her hair during her capture 40 years ago, a last connection to her destroyed homeworld. "They're flowering," she said, her face bright with joy. "I wasn't sure they would survive in this soil, but look." The crystal flowers were beautiful, casting rainbow patterns on the greenhouse walls as they caught the light from Haven's Rest's twin suns. But more than their beauty, Jake could see what they meant to Kira. They were proof that something from her world could still grow, still thrive, even in an alien place. "They're amazing," Jake said, kneeling beside her. "Just like their gardener." Kira smiled and reached out to touch his mind with hers, sharing the pure happiness she felt in this moment. Over the months, their telepathic connection had grown stronger and more natural. Jake had learned to receive her thoughts without the overwhelming flood of emotion that had characterized their early conversations. Their relationship had grown too, evolving from rescuer and rescued to true partners. Jake had expected to be Kira's protector, helping her adjust to life outside the museum. Instead, he had discovered that she was helping him heal from wounds he hadn't even known he carried. "The Henderson family is coming for dinner tonight," Kira said, standing and brushing dirt from her hands. "Lisa mentioned that their youngest daughter has been having nightmares again." Jake nodded. Word had spread quietly through the colony about Kira's gift for helping people with emotional problems. She couldn't heal physical injuries, but her telepathic abilities allowed her to ease mental pain in ways that traditional medicine couldn't match. Parents brought children who had been traumatized by the harsh realities of frontier life. Adults sought her help with depression, anxiety, and old griefs that wouldn't heal. Kira never asked for payment, but the colonists always found ways to repay her kindness. Fresh vegetables appeared on their doorstep. Jake would find his equipment, mysteriously repaired by anonymous helpers. Their small home was always warm because neighbors made sure their heating unit never lacked for power cells. "Dr. Chen wants to meet with us tomorrow," Jake said as they walked back toward their house. "She's been asking more questions about your people's medical knowledge." Dr. Chen was the colony's physician, an elderly woman who had come to Haven's Rest after losing her license for refusing to follow government directives about treating alien refugees. She had quickly recognized that Kira's understanding of biology and healing went far beyond anything human doctors had learned. "I know," Kira replied. "She's been having dreams about the epidemic on Kepler Station. She thinks my people's healing techniques might help prevent future outbreaks." Jake wasn't surprised that Kira already knew about the meeting. Her telepathic range had expanded dramatically since leaving the museum, and she was naturally attuned to the emotional needs of everyone around her. Sometimes Jake wondered if she had chosen to help the colonists, or if her compassionate nature simply made it impossible for her to ignore their pain. That evening, the Henderson family arrived for dinner just as Haven's Rest's suns were setting behind the mountains. 8-year-old Amy Henderson clung to her mother's hand, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from seeing too much violence at too young an age. The mining colonies were dangerous places. Equipment failures, cave-ins, and attacks by native predators were constant threats. Children grew up fast on the frontier, but sometimes they grew up scared instead of strong. "Hello, Amy," Kira said gently, kneeling down to the girl's eye level. "Would you like to see my crystal flowers? They only bloom at night." Amy nodded shyly, and Kira led her to the greenhouse while the adults talked. Through the transparent walls, Jake could see Kira sitting with the little girl among the glowing plants, her hand resting lightly on Amy's shoulder. The child's tense posture gradually relaxed as Kira's telepathic touch eased away the nightmares that had been haunting her sleep. "She's got a gift," Amy's father said, watching his daughter smile for the first time in weeks. "I don't know how she does it, but she can take away pain in a way that regular doctors can't." Jake nodded. feeling proud of the woman he had helped rescue. But more than pride, he felt grateful. Saving Kira from the museum had been the right thing to do, but he had never expected how much she would give back to the world once she was free. Later that night, after the Henderson family had gone home with a much happier daughter, Jake and Kira sat on their small porch watching the stars. Haven's Rest had no light pollution, so the night sky was a brilliant tapestry of countless suns and distant galaxies. "Do you ever regret it?" Kira asked suddenly. "Giving up your old life to help me?" Jake looked at her in surprise. "Regret it? Kira, these past 6 months have been the happiest time of my life. I spent years feeling guilty about the war, about the things I saw and didn't try to stop. Helping you escape, watching you help other people. It's given me something I never thought I'd have." "What's that?" she asked. "Peace," Jake said simply. "For the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm doing something meaningful instead of just fixing broken machines." Kira smiled and leaned against his shoulder. Through their telepathic connection, Jake felt her contentment and something deeper, a love that went beyond romance or friendship. They were partners in the truest sense, two beings from different worlds who had found in each other exactly what they needed to heal. "The news broadcasts are talking about changes in government policy toward alien refugees," Kira said quietly. "Dr. Winters has been giving interviews about the museum exhibits, questioning whether some of the displays might actually be living prisoners." Jake felt a flutter of worry. "Are you concerned about being discovered?" "No," Kira said. "I'm hopeful. If people are finally starting to ask the right questions, maybe other prisoners can be freed. Maybe the children won't grow up thinking that conquering other worlds is the natural order of things." They sat in comfortable silence, watching a meteor shower paint bright lines across the star-filled sky. Jake thought about the journey that had brought them here, from a chance encounter in a museum to this moment of perfect peace on a distant world. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The colony always needed repairs and improvements. More people would come seeking Kira's help with their emotional wounds. Dr. Chen would want to discuss ways to use Kira's knowledge to help other colonies survive and thrive. But tonight, Jake was content to sit under alien stars with the most remarkable person he had ever met, knowing that they had found something precious in the vast darkness of space, a place where they both belonged, and a purpose that gave meaning to every day they spent together. In the distance, Kira's crystal flowers glowed softly in their greenhouse, a reminder that beautiful things could grow anywhere if they were given the chance to flourish. Just like hope, just like love, just like the friendship between two beings who had learned that the greatest strength came not from conquest, but from compassion.